We are so glad to see some of you have already joined, some of you quite before, and some of you more recently. Thank you for joining us on this afternoon. My name is Dan Dworkin with Joffe Emergency Services. My role is the Director of Infrastructure and Assessment, and today we're really excited to have Casey Donohue of Get CPR Done present to everyone. So we are going to wait until 1 o'clock, and then at that time we'll be welcoming everybody and kicking off right about 1:02. Just before 1:02, we'll start it up and begin with the presentation. So thank you for being here. We look forward to speaking with you more soon. Welcome everybody, and thank you for coming this afternoon. Once again, my name is Dan Dworkin. I'm with Joffe Emergency Services, and we're the host for today's webinar. The webinar itself is about CPR, AED, and first aid training in schools, and it's being presented by Casey Donohue, who's an amazing individual, and she'll be speaking with you more in just a moment. If you have any questions during the broadcast, please feel free to use the questions tab on the GoToWebinar toolbar. I see that we've already gotten a couple questions, one about certification for this. This is a certified class, and I'll let Casey answer that as well, and someone just giving a nice hello. So appreciate all of you being here. It's really great that we have so many people in attendance today. This is going to be recorded, and it is being recorded, and will be available afterward for those that are interested, and we will be sending information about that in the not too distant future. But now that we're just about 2 minutes after the hour, we can go ahead and begin. And again, my name is Dan Dworkin with Joffe Emergency Services. Thank you for attending, and Casey, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dan. And I want to say thank you to all of you attending. I have heard from some of you prior to this webinar, and I appreciate you taking your afternoon to spend some time with us. I am an educator. My experience is I've been teaching for the past close to 20 years, but I took over doing CPR certifications about 4 years ago through Joffe Emergency Services. And so just going to give you a little background. I'm from the LA area, and I started working with Chris Joffe through his certification. Joffe used to do CPR, and Get CPR Done is now a partner of Joffe. And I can't tell you enough how much I love what I do, but also I'm big fans of Joffe and all that they do. So you'll see how there's a lot of overlap between school safety, event safety, CPR, disaster preparedness. It all kind of goes hand in hand. So like Dan said, questions are welcome. We're going to be taking 2 opportunities to answer questions throughout the live webinar, where you can ask questions on the question link on the GoToWebinar toolbar on the side. But also, after the webinar, if you sit with it and you think about some things and you take some notes and you look back, if you have questions for me specifically, I have my email address up there. I'm happy to answer them. Any question, no question is too big or too small. Feel free, and I'll get back to you. So, just going to give you a little opening video. This is something that I sometimes share with classes. I teach classes across the country. I teach teachers, I teach nurses, doctors, and I have to say some of the most rewarding classes I have are teaching students. So I'm just going to show you a little opening video, which I think is sweet, and I'm going to show one other video, and then it's going to be me talking the majority of the time. But here's the video. Enjoy.
Casey, I don't know if it's just me, but I'm not hearing the audio on this montage, and I believe it's just a montage. So in terms of a voiceover, if you could just tell us what they're saying, or I'm sure we can share the link with people afterwards.
Okay. Okay, I was just told by Dan that there was no audio on that, so I sat here listening to this beautiful video. Basically, what it says is, you can teach me how to drive a car, you can teach me to solve for X, you can teach me, and it goes into different things you can learn in school. But one of the things that's something that historically hasn't been taught in schools, especially in California, is hands-only CPR and first aid, and that's something that is changing, and it's changing rapidly, thankfully. The next slide I'm going to show you is just talking about what we're going to do today, and then I'm going to show you a map. So basically, the importance right now is to quickly recognize what an emergency is and to respond safely. So we're going to talk about that briefly in the webinar today. I did have some questions beforehand and even as the webinar started about certifying students. This webinar, unfortunately, is not going to be a certification. Certifications through the American Heart Association or EMS Safety require skills testing. So because this webinar is one way and because I'm talking to you, even though you have the opportunity to answer questions, or I have the opportunity to answer your questions, it is not going to be a certification. However, I will give you lots of information and I will share strategies and tips on how to be a significant first responder and how to help in situations and empower you if you're a student and empower you if you're a teacher to help your students in case of an emergency. So just know that there will be some takeaways from that. Also, I will talk about some ways that we can implement the program starting today in your school without necessarily doing a certification. Of course, certification is a great goal, but there are ways you can implement, even practice dialing 911, even reaching out and determining whether something is an emergency or not. So those are some of the things we're going to discuss. Also, what is a CPR course? And what is a first aid course? So what do those two things look like in general, and what do they look like in a school setting? So basically, CPR laws in the US started probably, I think, in the 80s, where some of the earliest states started implementing CPR laws. So what started all of this, and even kind of was the catalyst for this webinar, was the fact that California just recently, as of last fall, signed a law that stated that CPR would be a requirement for high school graduation. Now, As you can see from the map, more than half the country was implementing CPR laws pre-2016. But California, the law, as you see it's in purple, will not go into effect until the school year 18-19. So what that looks like is sophomores now, it would be beneficial to start certifying freshmen and sophomores so that there's not a backlog when they're seniors. So the law was signed into effect by Governor Brown in September because there was an incident at school where a young child had an anaphylactic shock due to some sort of a sting or some sort of allergic reaction, and she wasn't able to get help in time. I'm about to throw out some statistics, but a quarter of all school-age students will have their first allergic reaction or anaphylactic shock at school without even knowing that they had an allergic reaction. So coupled with the new CPR law, there is a law that has been put into effect regarding EpiPens. I'm not going to go in depth into that. We can talk more about that, or you can Google EpiPens in schools. But schools are now required to have EpiPens that can be used universally that aren't a prescription. So that's something that happened. But Governor Brown decided that it was time for California to be part of the rest of the country in implementing CPR as a high school requirement, graduation requirement. Now, as you know, for some reason the audio is not working, so I'm actually going to see if I can play this and have the screen show the dialogue at the bottom. If it doesn't work, then I'm just going to go ahead and skip it. This is a great one. This video is great, and I'm going to provide the links for everyone, just because it talks about schools that have implemented CPR programs. So that's why I like this video, because you can see firsthand what it looks like for a school to implement the program. It also has students firsthand share their experiences of learning CPR for the first time. So let's see if we can get this to work. Hopefully we can. And I'm going to mute myself, so hopefully that'll mean that the video will play. And Dan, let me know if it's not working, okay? Thanks.
Unfortunately, it looks like we still don't have audio on your video tracks. But thank you for pointing that out beforehand, and we'll be sure to share all these videos at the end of the webinar. Make sure you go ahead and bring yourself under the unmute on your toolbar as well, Casey, and we'll get back going.
Okay, I'm going to try one more time.
Great.
Nope. Did you hear that, Dan?
No, the audio wasn't coming through again, unfortunately.
Okay, that's okay.
We'll just share that with everyone afterwards, and as everyone can see, these are from the American Heart Association, so they are definitely findable online, and we'll, again, be sending out the direct links to everybody after the webinar.
Absolutely. So as you can see, the American Heart Association has a program that is in effect that is lessons and videos and such. And if you go to heart.org/CPR in schools, those links and those resources are all available. Now, just before I go into more of the CPR in schools, I am in no way proposing that this is the way you should do it. I am a certified American Heart Association instructor, and I'm also certified with EMS safety. I'm using the CPR in schools lesson plan just to kind of give you an overview. There are other ways to implement it. This isn't to kind of sell the CPR in schools to you through the American Heart Association, but they just have really great resources. So the CPR lesson that they're speaking of can be done in a single class period. They say the curriculum connections are health and language arts, obviously science. I would argue PE, there's a huge physical component to CPR, and also anatomy. If you look at the different things that you're doing when you're doing CPR, there's an anatomy component as well. So You can see here the health standards. We have common core standards that a lot of states use, California included. There are alignments that go to the state standards and the common core standards that can be satisfied by doing CPR lessons and teaching first aid classes. So that's always great if you're interested in that kind of thing. So basically, by the end of the class, the students are going to understand the basics of hands-only CPR. So what's the difference between hands-only CPR and CPR? Well, hands-only does not require breathing. You don't need to give breaths with hands-only CPR. Now, little side note, every 5 years, the American Heart Association releases new protocols for doing first aid and CPR training. These protocols are exhaustively researched, and in almost every class I teach, someone says, I heard you don't have to do breaths anymore, and that's not entirely true. Hands-only CPR is very successful, but if you are able to do breaths and you have the appropriate barrier device, it is recommended that you do breaths. If you don't, and you're not comfortable doing CPR with breathing, and you're only comfortable doing hands-only, then by all means do that. So the idea is when teaching students, the best way to teach large groups is hands-only. However, just last month, I trained a 10-year-old, a 12-year-old, and a 14-year-old in a group class. The 10-year-old was doing it because she wanted to be a babysitter, and she thought that would look good on, I don't think she used the word resume, she wasn't there yet, but she thought it would look good to her potential clients. So just going to skip over to the next thing. The equipment that's needed to do a CPR plan in your program, obviously, it says mini and mannequin. So some sort of a mannequin device, doesn't need to be the American Heart Association devices, but you want to have a mannequin device. You want to have some sort of a video if you don't have a certified instructor. Without the video, you would need an instructor to show the proper hand placement technique, etc. Now, this lesson plan I'm going through quickly, but it will be available after the webinar, so just so you know. So some of the things that you can bring up before the class starts is some questions. So you can talk about, what is a cardiac arrest? What does it mean if someone is having a cardiac arrest? So that's when you can talk about a bit about anatomy. You can talk about the heart. What does it do? What is its role in the body? What is a cardiac arrest? And basically what that means is the heart is stopped. Cardiac means heart and arrest means stop. So the heart is stopped. Why? Well, there are various reasons. If you want to go more in depth, you can. You need not. Just know that the heart stops and CPR provides movement or beats the heart when the heart can't pump for itself. So the difference, I already told you the difference between hands-only CPR and regular CPR, but it's important to note that if a person is going into cardiac arrest, and it's the leading cause of death in this country, just so you know, for both men and women, if someone is going into cardiac arrest, if they do not get early intervention in the form of CPR or AED, which I'm going to talk about, automated external defibrillator, if they don't get assistance straight away, 90% or more of the people who have cardiac arrests will die before they reach a hospital if they don't get early intervention in the form of CPR. So that's a staggering statistic, and it's important to note because you don't have to be an adult to perform CPR. What are the chances of survival? They don't often say what the chances of survival is with CPR, but just know that people can survive. It doubles or triples their chances of survival. So it's important to note. There is a DVD that can be played. I personally, when I've taught classes, I rarely show DVDs. I like to show little snippets, maybe some YouTube videos, but for larger groups, it's important to note that you want to have multiple teachers going around helping, and preferably those teachers that are helping are certified and up to date with CPR. So also talk about what's hard and what's easy about it. After the students practice, do a debrief, discuss. I've had students come up with some incredible questions that have actually dictated the way in which the rest of the course goes because their questions were so insightful. And they'll bring a new perspective to the experience, more so than adults will. Especially, I've been taking CPR classes since I was 14, so you can imagine how many different experiences and how many different, oh, it used to be 15 breaths to, or 15 compressions to 2 breaths, or 30 compressions to 2 breaths. So students who've never taken it before, they're fresh, they're new, they have no preconceived notions about CPR, which is great. Post-test, this can be done verbally at the end of the class. It can be a written post-test. It's up to you. Answer keys. Oh, okay. So one of the things before we go into question answer, one of the things I think is important to note, and this is one of the things I'm going to be doing in the class, is just know that you're not required, and that's same for people who are certified in CPR, you're not required to perform CPR if someone needs it. It's a voluntary thing. But, and I'm going to drive this point home like a lot because I think 911 is so important, there is no age range or limit on who can call 911. I'm going to go more in depth into 911 and the practices and protocols to do that, but just encourage your students, if it's an emergency, they don't need to know CPR or first aid to be able to call 911. So I'm going to hand it over to Dan. I'm going to take a couple minutes to answer some questions. I know I just dropped a bunch of knowledge on you all, and I appreciate you dealing with the technical challenges so far. But Dan, take it away.
Yeah, so thank you so much, everybody, for the questions so far. And just a quick piece about the EpiPens for Schools program. Mylar is the maker of the company that owns EpiPens, if I forgot the name from the news a few years back. And it is the EpiPen for Schools, the number 4, schools, is the website. So if you want to look into this free, quote unquote, EpiPens for Schools, that is the program that Mylar has. And then there's a generic, I can't remember, I believe it's CVS is working on a generic EpiPen as well.
Yes, CVS. And, oh, really quickly, just to jump on that, I worked with a school in the Bay Area about getting those. Even though the EpiPens are free, they still need to be prescribed by a doctor. So just know that if the school has a staff doctor or an allergist or someone that they can know that can prescribe them, it still needs to be prescribed. But it's my understanding that Mylan, they do them for free. So yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you. Absolutely, there is physician requirement on that. You're absolutely correct. So our first question that came through was, does the new law that is coming into effect require graduating students to become certified or simply trained? And if you could speak to the difference between certification and specifically training versus certification.
Right. So that's a great question, first off, because I actually had to read the law itself, which I don't know if anyone has ever taken the time to read a law. It's very laborious. And what I did read it, and I went through. It is required that the students be certified through either the American Heart Association, Red Cross, or EMS Safety. So what that looks like is there needs to be a certified instructor that can certify the students. Now, that being said, it says in the law, CPR, first aid, and it can be hands only. So each state is different, but the California law does require that they do get a certification. Now, this is the part that the law doesn't speak to. The certifications are good for 2 years. Those of you who are educators know this, because every 2 years you need to be certified. So what that means is if a student takes it, and I said sophomores, if a student takes it their sophomore year in December, it's only good for 2 years. It only brings them through till their senior year, December. I personally don't know if the law speaks to the expiration or if just the certification will suffice. So that I personally don't know about, and the law does not speak to that specifically. So that's something I would like to know more about, and I will look into it. If anyone else has heard any different, I would love to hear about that. So.
Well, thank you for that answer. And this next question, I think then we'll probably kick it off from here and let you keep going. But we also have some students attending, and I applaud the adults in their lives that brought them into this.
Yay!
And so if this is really aimed for the students, the rest of this webinar, we realize this has been a little top level, but I do think it's good information for them. And hearing you speak about the law is also helpful, in that it's important that they understand the reason why students are now being required to have the certification as well.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, and I'm so glad to hear that students are taking part in this. I taught middle school for 8 years, and I tried as often as I could to engage and empower my students to do stuff like this. Unfortunately, I wasn't an instructor at that time, so I never was able to certify my students, but starting next Tuesday, I'm going to be training high school students pretty regularly, probably once every other week for the remainder of the school year. So I'm really looking forward to it, really excited about it. So, and I just booked a class where I'm teaching fifth graders. So, um, just so you know, really quickly, there is no age requirement. There is no minimum or maximum age in doing CPR. If the instructor states that the person can actually complete the compressions, which is at a depth of 2 inches down, center of the chest, etc., if the instructor feels that the student has passed, there's no age. It can be a 9-year-old, it can be an 8-year-old, depending on the strength. It is a physical requirement that states that they need to be able to do this, but if they, if it's one-handed, two-handed, students can pass. So that's good to know too, and that's something I just learned recently myself. So, yeah.
Well, thank you for that answer. Thank you for these questions so far. We'll have some more time for questions at the end, is what it's looking like. So if you have more questions, please feel free. Go ahead and put them in that question box in the toolbar. And again, students, thank you for attending as well.
Awesome.
And the
Right.
floor is yours, Casey.
Okay, so I want to talk about in the very beginning, before anything even remotely regarding first response to any emergency, just know that this is a good thing to know in general. Universal precautions means you do this before you even treat someone. So this means washing your hands. This means protecting yourself. Making sure that you use soap and water to wash your hands. I'm a big fan of soap and water. Putting on gloves is great, but afterwards you need to wash your hands with soap and water. I tend to kind of shy away from hand sanitizer unless it's a true emergency, like there's no running water, because what hand sanitizer does is people use it and assume that their hands are perfectly clean, and then they kind of go and walk around and touch things, and it breeds resistant bacteria is what hand sanitizer does. So basically soap and water, doesn't need to be hot water, warm water is great. Soap and water for 20 seconds. What that looks like, and when I teach my class I do this, is singing happy birthday while you're washing your hands with soap and water. It doesn't need to be antibacterial soap, doesn't need to be anything fancy, just regular old soap is fine. And happy birthday song or ABC song, whichever you prefer, and that's the most effective way to protect yourself. So responding to emergencies. So I already quoted this statistic, but over 90% of people who have a cardiac event, which means a heart attack, a stroke type event, they will die, over 90%, if they do not receive immediate care. So just know that each state has a Good Samaritan law. So if you provide care to the best of your ability, to the best of your knowledge, then you will be protected. So if you're helping someone out and you're not doing it maliciously or to do harm, you're going to be protected. I know in the state of California, a lot of the questions I receive in my CPR classes are, am I liable if something happens or if I hurt the person? One of the things when we get into CPR is when you're doing compressions at a depth of at least 2 inches on a person's chest, there will be some ribs breaking. I'm not going to get very graphic in this webinar, but that's the most I'm going to say about that. So you will be protected if you're a certified person or if you've gone through training and you're doing the best of your ability. Someone can't sue you due to the Good Samaritan law. We're going to talk about learning to recognize what an emergency is and how to respond, and how to check a scene, that a scene is safe, and that to check for safety of a person at a distance. Now, one of the things that's most important, I talked a little bit about the legal parts, I'll go through that in a second, so one of the things that I'm an EMT also, and one of the EMT classes I took the first ever thing that they say to you is, your safety is the most important. So what that means is, contrary to what firefighters and police officers and people of the such or the like do, contrary to what they do for their job, you do not put yourself in harm's way in order to help someone else. What that means is you're not going to help someone if you're a potential victim. And that was really hard for me as a lifelong educator to think, oh, well, my safety is most important. As an educator, I'd put my student safety above mine, but your safety is the most important thing. So if a scene is unsafe, go ahead and call 911. Monitor the scene. If it becomes safe, then you can provide assistance, but scene safety is most important. So just to kind of review the Good Samaritan law, because I know legal issues are really important to people. If you respond voluntarily, you're not paid to respond, so you're not doing it as a job like a nurse or a firefighter. You provide care with good intentions, no malice. You stay within the limits of your training. I joke with my classes. I say, I'm an EMT and a CPR instructor. It's not like I'm going to, do a tracheotomy on someone like they would on, Grey's Anatomy or Chicago Med. I don't have the skill set to do that, so I'm not going to do that. However, if a doctor responds to an emergency, that's within their limits of training. They know how to do that, so they're going to do it. So I'm not going to go and do something that I'm not comfortable or not trained in doing. Also, you're not reckless or careless. And finally, if you provide care to a person, it's important that you stay with them. So unless the scene becomes unsafe for you, it's important that you stay with the person, keeping them calm, keeping them safe until help arrives. Now, gaining consent. So there are two types of consent. What is consent? That means the person says that you can help them. Yes, you can help me if you're trained, or if you know what you're doing, you can help me. If someone is awake and alert and they're conscious and responsive, they need to give you consent before you treat them. That's the law. They need to say it's okay. People have a right to say to you, no, I'm fine, I don't need your help. You can still call 911, but you still need to get consent in order to help someone. Once you help someone, it's important to give your name to them, make them feel calm, make them feel safe. Your level of training, I'm a first responder, CPR, first aid, whatever course you've taken, let them know and ask for help. Now, for CPR purposes, the person is not responsive, they're not awake, so you do not need to get consent. It's called implied consent. What that means is, if the person were awake, they would give it to you. It's implied. The implication is they would say yes. So that's how the Good Samaritan law works. That's what it looks like in action. Okay, so a couple things. What if someone seems seriously injured but refuses help? You can still call 911. If they refuse your help, call 911. What if someone is unresponsive? Like I said, implied consent. What if someone refuses help, then becomes unresponsive? What that means is they've changed their level of consciousness, so then it's implied consent. So then you can help them if they refuse help and then they become unresponsive. Okay, checking the scene and the person. So when you go into a situation that may be unsafe, you want to check around to see that the scene is safe. Check the scene for possible danger. Traffic, smoke, ice. Well, not so much in California, in Los Angeles, but I just came from Chicago, so it was icy there. Is it wet? Is it an unstable surface? Are you walking on something and the ground is shaking? Blood and bodily fluids, chemicals, etc. Those are all unsafe scenes. Now, unsafe crowd, large crowd, people with weapons, those kinds of things are unsafe. Make sure that you step away, call 911, and get help in that respect. Okay, next thing, check the person. How many are there? What's their general condition? Are there any causes of illness or injury that you know of? When you call 911, there's a reason. It's because there's a life-threatening emergency or danger or illness, okay? And if you're not sure if it's an emergency, still call 911 and they will let you know if it's an emergency or not, okay? Calling 911. I think it's important for everyone, and I take time in my classes to talk about this. I think it's important for everyone to note that you call 911 as soon as you know there's an emergency. And when I teach students, I say, kind of like your spidey sense, you know, that little sense that you have that you know that something is wrong and that you need to get help. When can you ask a bystander to call 911? Well, if you're in the middle of helping someone in an emergency, point to someone, identify them. You in the pink shirt with the glasses on, call 911. You want to identify the person because it's important that they know that you're talking to them. If they can't call 911 and come right back, point to someone else. Ask them to go wait. If the person who's on with 911, you know, is not moving, have someone else go wait for the paramedics. If you're the person calling 911, just a quick little history lesson about 911. 911 in the state of California, when you call 911 from a cell phone, it goes to the California Highway Patrol. What that means is it goes to dispatch, who does not know where you are. So it's important that you take note of your address and your cross streets so that they know what's going on. So name, location, what kind of emergency is it? Is it a medical emergency? Is it another kind of emergency? If you need your hands free, like if you're performing CPR, then go ahead and put it on speakerphone. The person who is the dispatcher from 911 will give you instructions and help you. And make sure that they are through with the conversation before you hang up. Okay, so just a quick little review, chain of survival. If someone has a cardiac arrest, that means their heart stops beating. They become unresponsive and no breathing occurs. Just so you know, within 4 to 6 minutes, there can be brain damage occurring. That means there's lack of blood flow and oxygen to the brain. Cardiac arrest, if someone has no blood flow to the brain after about 10 minutes, that means that they could possibly be in brain death, which is irreversible. One of the leading causes is heart disease. The best odds to survive a sudden cardiac arrest is people perform these links. And notice how it says bystanders. Now, I'm going to talk about the word bystander for a second. In urban neighborhoods in the United States, less than 18% of people in an emergency situation will do something. If you're interested, you can Google or find out more information about the bystander effect. But what it says is 10 or more people in large groups will do nothing rather than do something in an emergency. So what I hope to communicate and empower students and teachers and administrators is that you do not need permission. You don't need to be fearful or nervous about calling 911 because you don't need to know CPR to call 911, right? So bystanders can perform the first link, which means calling 911, call out, take control, say, does anyone know CPR? Early AED is the next step. We're going to talk about AEDs for a little bit. AEDs is an automated external defibrillator. It's a machine that provides early intervention to people who have an abnormal heart rhythm. What that looks like is it's a machine. They're everywhere. They're actually, I mean, it's it's amazing. I just was at O'Hare Airport. They are at O'Hare Airport. They're everywhere. And you do not need a certification to use an AED machine. You don't need to be certified. I trained some lifeguards and a couple administrators from the Department of Beaches and Harbors here in Los Angeles, and everyone said, oh, I thought you needed a card in order to use the AED. You don't. In fact, they did a study. One of my colleagues shared with me this study. 15 first responders and 15 second graders were given AEDs and told to use them just by turning them on and following directions. The second graders were only 15 seconds slower than the first responders in using the AEDs properly because they followed the directions. The AEDs will talk you through it. It's pretty amazing. Okay, so CPR overview, how it works in schools. CAB or hands only, what's the difference? CAB is compressions, airway, breathing. That's what CPR is. You do compressions, you open the airway, and you perform breathing. That's the certification you get when you take the class and you do the breaths. Hands only is teaching students how to use only hands without giving the airway or doing the breathing part. Both are certifications that you can get. Both satisfy the requirements for the state laws for CPR. Now, adult CPR versus child versus infant. There are differences, very, very small, but there are differences. So understanding that you can do CPR on children and infants just as you can on adults, but it might not be as hard when you give the compressions. Additionally, just know that adults most often have cardiac or heart issues, and children and infants most likely will have lung issues as the result of an asthma attack or an allergic reaction. So most children and infants will not have heart-related issues. Adults are the ones that will have heart-related issues. Just a couple of considerations for CPR. Understand that cold temperatures are going to affect CPR, and when you shock using an AED, it's going to change the person's heart rhythm and might actually assist them so that they become responsive. So just know that those are some of the things that can happen. Like I said, there are alternatives to CPR. Hands-only CPR is one of them. And there are several times when you should stop doing CPR if you're certified. Couple of things. The victim wakes up. I asked this question in all of my classes, and I'd say 95% of them say as their first answer when to stop CPR, the person wakes up. On the rare occasion, there will be people who will forget entirely that will be a time when you stop doing CPR. That is the goal of doing CPR, is to help the person wake up, but it's the least likely to happen just by doing CPR alone. The person needs to get into a hospital setting, and that's where they can get their most assistance. The AED says clear. Once the AED gets put on the person, they say clear, you stop doing CPR. The scene becomes unsafe. All of a sudden, we live in California, the earth starts shaking, you want to stop doing CPR. CPR is a very exhausting undertaking. It requires that you go above a person, compress at a depth of at least 2 inches, and do 30 compressions in a row, super fast. In fact, it's so fast that the song Staying Alive, some of you may know it, if you play that song, that's the beat of how you should do your compressions. I'm not going to sing it for you guys. use your imagination, but it's recommended that first responders and rescuers only do CPR for 2 minutes before they switch out with someone else. It's been determined that after 2 minutes, the quality of CPR goes down because of how physically exhausting doing CPR is. So make sure that you don't keep going when you're exhausted, because you might do more harm than good. Finally, if someone comes, a paramedic, a doctor, says, hey, let me take over, then you can switch out and let them take over doing CPR. So I mentioned AEDs. These are everywhere now. It was on a plane, there was an AED. They're at the gym, movie theaters. Why is an AED used? It's used because a person has an abnormal heart rhythm. Contrary to what they show you on TV shows and on movies, an AED shocks a heart that has a rhythm. It does not shock a flat line. So when you see in movies where the line goes flat and it goes beep and then they shock them, that is medically incorrect. So I want to let you guys know moving forward, if you see that on a TV show, a rhythm needs to be in place before you shock a person. And CPR establishes that rhythm. So CPR enables people to have a rhythm so that if it's shockable, then the AED will shock it. Couple things. An AED will never shock someone who does not need it. So there are AEDs in schools. I had administrators and teachers ask me, well, what if the kids take it out and start playing with it? Not that those students present or any student would actually play with it. An AED reads a heart rhythm. It is stuck on a person's chest, on the skin, and it determines whether the person needs it. It's such a smart machine. I would argue it's one of the best medical inventions of the 20th century. It's so smart that it will determine if a person needs it or not. So if a person doesn't need it, then it won't shock the person. So understand that it's great if it's used, and it won't shock if it's needed. Also, it's important that where you are in life, it's important to know where the closest AED is. If you live near a fire station, that's where the AED is going to be. They have AEDs at fire stations. They have them at supermarkets. They have them at gyms, like I said before. Airports, government offices, they have them in malls and stadiums, etc. They have them often in security offices at large buildings. So if you're ever in a large building, a security officer might know where they are. Like I said, I already gave you a little kind of brief preview of what an AED is. It's like a computer reboot, right? You reboot a computer if it's not working. However, we're not like a car battery. We can't shock it to make it work again, but you can reboot a computer. So that's what an AED does. So as you see in the picture over here, this is an abnormal heart rhythm. It's not sustainable. A person's heart can't continue to beat like that. What the AED is it shocks the rhythm. It actually stops the heart momentarily and hopes that the heart will reboot into a normal rhythm, which is sinus rhythm. You can see it in the picture. It is most effective if it's within 3 minutes of the person having their cardiac event. So basically, people say to me, when do you use an AED? The answer is whenever it's there. Whenever you have it, use it. It will do all the work for you. All you have to do is turn it on and shock when it asks you to. Okay, using an AED. So if you have an AED at your school, if you have an AED at your gym, take the time to find out where it is, but also see if you can ask an administrator, staff member, if you can take a look at it and just see it. Like I said, you do not need a certification to use an AED. It does not require that you have a card. All that you need to know is it does the work for you. All you have to do is turn it on. And AED is more effective if used when you're using it with CPR. If you do use an AED alone, it's effective as well. But if a person has no heart rhythm, then it's not going to work. So you want to use it with CPR. Identify actions when, let's see, when something interferes with AED placement. So pads go on skin. You don't want to put pads on clothing. You want to put them on direct skin. Just know that you want to make sure that the AED is fully charged, that it has a battery, that everything is in place and the pads aren't expired. Use them on the skin and make sure there's nothing in between the skin and the pads. And make sure the person isn't wet. They don't need to be bone dry, but make sure that they are not wet. Couple things. We talk a lot about CPR, but first aid is something that I just want to touch upon because first aid is something that you're probably going to be seeing more of in your lifetime than CPR. I've been certified, like I said, since I was 14. Not going to tell you how old I am, but it's been a really long time. But I have used more first aid skills than I have used CPR. I've done CPR 2 to 3 times in my life, 3 times in my life. But I've done first aid a lot. So it's important to recognize that assessment means determining whether or not you're going to be needing first aid. Learn quickly to identify life-threatening conditions. That can be done in a class. That can be done online. I highly recommend that you use websites like heart.org or Red Cross. Don't try to go to WebMD or any of those places and self-diagnose. That's just, it's not good for anyone involved. So again, going back to the scene safety, you want to make sure that the scene is safe, that your hands are clean. You want to check the person, make sure that they give you consent if they're awake and alert. So that's the difference between responsive and unresponsive. Unresponsive means they're not responding to you verbally or physically. Responsive means that they will acknowledge you when you speak to them or when you touch them physically. Okay, quickly, 3 phases of assessment. Just to remember these 3 things when doing any kind of assessment, whether it's first aid or CPR. Check that the scene is safe, check the person, check again. So that means check the person, check the scene, check the person, check again. Like it's an ongoing thing because a person who's in a first aid or medical emergency might be fine and then 5 minutes later they're not so fine. Either they had a head injury that progressed or something like that. So also, scenes become unsafe very quickly, whether it's because of other people or because of fire or anything like that. Just make sure that you're constantly checking. That's the important thing for scene safety. Okay. Call 911 if. 911, like I said, is an invaluable resource. The people who are on the phone when you call 911 are trained professionals. They will assist you in any emergency. I've called 911. I've talked to people. They've helped me. It's amazing. So, couple reasons, well, several reasons, not limited to, but including these following reasons. If the person is unresponsive or they have decreased responsiveness, or they're unable to answer questions. Difficulty breathing, no breathing, severe bleeding, which is not stopped by direct pressure, signs of a heart attack or stroke. The signs and symptoms of a heart attack and stroke can be found online at Red Cross or the American Heart Association. Persistent pressure, pain in the abdomen, that means that there's something going on, it's not right, and it's very, very obvious that it's painful to the person. If the person's vomiting blood or they have blood in the stool, severe allergic reaction, I want to talk about this for a couple seconds, more than a couple seconds. A severe allergic reaction means that the person's airway is closing or that their throat is scratchy. A severe allergic reaction is not a swollen arm or a swollen leg. That's a mild allergic reaction. So when it comes to severe allergic reaction, that means that the person's face and neck and throat are being affected by a sting that maybe happened on their leg or arm. So that's important to note, because I've seen people have like pretty serious allergic reactions on their arm where their arm swelled really, really big, but the allergen did not travel to their throat or their neck, so it wasn't as severe as it looked. It looked worse than it was. Severe pain, seizure, anytime someone has an electrical burn or electrical shock, that's an automatic 911 call. If you suspect poisoning, head or neck injury, fall, if someone's having a pregnancy emergency, and if you don't know what to do. If you're in a situation and you have no idea what to do, but you know you need help, call 911. 911 is a service that's offered to you. You do not get charged. Your family doesn't get charged. The school doesn't get charged. If you call 911, it is a free service. In fact, if the EMTs and paramedics come, you will not be charged for that either. What happens is if the person goes onto the rig, the ambulance, and gets taken to a hospital, that's when fees are incurred. So you won't get charged for a 911 call. So just so you know. So some closing activities, and I do want to take the last several minutes of the class to answer questions, because I know I just spoke a whole heck of a lot. But there are some things you can do with your students as a closing activity or as something to even introduce the topic of first aid and CPR. There's a couple of videos at heart.org. You can invite students to register for a challenge, a web-based challenge, which is kind of like they can track themselves with other students across the country. Find songs that, and this is a fun thing to do, find songs that have at least 100 beats per minute. So Staying Alive is a very dated song. Whenever I play it, people roll their eyes. I actually had a couple of students once who had never heard the song, if you can believe it, out there, people who who are my age, never heard the song Staying Alive. So that's a fun thing to do. Have students research songs, come in, share it, bring it in, and then they can be having that song in their head when they're doing CPR. Couple things. Train family and friends. Have students take a class with their family members. I trained a mother and her two sons in CPR, and it was a great family bonding experience. They can share stories about it, what was fun about it, that kind of thing. It's awesome. You can bring a language arts component into a CPR program by having them go to the Heart Hero page, or even write a short story, do some research. You can bring a little history into it, do some research on people saving lives. I tend to nerd out and go online and find really amazing CPR stories like this one. A child, remember how I told you CPR should only be done 2 minutes like at a time, so you do 2 minutes and then you rotate, someone else does 2 minutes. CPR was done in a hospital setting in Pennsylvania on a child for 75 minutes, 75 minutes, and the child survived. So again, that's in a hospital setting, so you have people who are trained in basic life support and advanced life support. But CPR was done for 45 minutes and the child survived, so or 75 minutes. 7.5, so you know that CPR works. It's quite amazing. Have the students ask people in their lives about experiences in cardiac arrest. They know someone, experiences calling 911, that kind of thing. It's an invaluable thing. I have to tell you, it's such a real kind of a badge of honor to have, to be trained and to be certified. So resources, there are numerous resources that were sent in previous emails, but feel free to email me if you need more. The student options, like I said, to review are hands-only CPR, which is also a certification, and there's CPR with breaths, including child CPR and infant CPR. Now, I was mindful of the time, and I appreciate those of you who stuck with us. About 9 minutes left, so I am happy to spend the last part of the class answering any questions. No question too big or too small for me. And if I don't know the answer, I am happy to get back to you if you provide me with your email address, or you can email me and I'll do some research. So, Dan?
Thank you so much. Thanks for the questions so far. We do have a lot, so actually I'm going to let you respond to some through email and kind of go to the more general ones
Okay.
that we have. The first one, safety as a whole loves three-letter acronyms, and CPR is a three-letter acronym that not everybody knows what it stands for. Just if you, that is a question, what does CPR stand for?
Oh, I love that question. And I'm so, usually when I teach the course in person, I'm very mindful of that. So I'm glad that someone brought that up, because I always say in the beginning of the course, CPR stands for cardiopulmonary resuscitation. Now, those are three, well, two very big words. One word, the cardiac, I alluded to earlier as meaning heart. But cardiac means, CPR means heart, lung, make it work again. So cardiopulmonary resuscitation. So pulmonary is lung, resuscitation means to get it going again, resuscitate. So what CPR is you're pumping, you're doing 30 compressions, depth of at least 2 inches at a rate of 100 compressions per minute. You're actually beating the heart for the person because their heart won't beat for themselves for whatever reason, whatever cardiac event happened. So you're making the heart beat when you're doing hands-only CPR, and then when you do breaths, you help the lungs refill again. Now, hands-only CPR is effective because one of the components in blood is oxygen. So even if you don't do breaths with CPR and you simply only do compressions, you're actually also pumping oxygen to the brain, which is one of the things that the earlier slide alluded to. The brain needs oxygen. A heart can beat on a bypass machine or with compressions, but the brain cannot function without oxygen. So like they said, 4 to 6 minutes can be brain damage and 10 minutes can be brain death without any oxygen to the brain. So great question.
Yeah, well, thank you. Very good, excellent answer as well.
Thanks.
The next one actually came from a couple people. So they work as a nurse or a teacher at elementary schools or in schools. They are certified in CPR, but not as a CPR trainer. Is it okay for them to review some of the material here with a class, be it fifth graders or middle school or high school, just as review and not as a certification?
Absolutely. That is a great question. Actually, I encourage people, especially if you're doing health, especially if you're doing any of those things, you do not need to be an instructor to go over these things. In order for a student to be certified, they need to be certified through an instructor, but you can show these videos, you can even do some practice, talk about things, and do that with students. You need not be an instructor to do that. So yes, by all means, that's part of the reason why I did this webinar, is because I wanted to communicate that I think it should be part of anyone's curriculum, whether they're certifying students or not, just to talk about how lives can be saved through early intervention. So yeah, no, please, by all means. And those school nurses and PE teachers and health teachers, feel free to email me, because I have lots and lots of resources that you can, handouts and videos and lesson plans. I have it all. So yeah, feel free.
Wonderful. Thanks for those offers too. And please,
Yeah.
everyone, do take us up on that. The next question. This one gets a little more technical in that in doing CPR, they're saying that the victim is in need of help, and yet we're told to protect our eyes, nose, mouth, and skin. What are we actually protecting ourselves from? If you could get into the more technical, what can happen, and why someone needs to protect themselves while doing
Yes.
CPR.
I'm so glad you asked that. That question is very valuable. Now, Universal precautions are very, very important. However, if you're doing CPR on someone that does not have bodily fluids on them, okay, bodily fluids, blood, vomit, sweat, you don't need to wear gloves when doing CPR necessarily because you're just doing compressions. Now, in terms of giving breaths, they recommend that you use a mask. Now, I've had this question numerous times, like I said, almost every class in the past. Why do you need a mask when doing CPR? Well, I studied infectious diseases in an undergraduate and microbiology and that kind of thing. There's not a whole heck of a lot, cold, flu, that kind of thing, that you can get mouth to mouth. But the idea of having a barrier device is in case the person vomits, in case they have blood in their mouth, that kind of thing. And it gives it more effective breaths if you have a barrier device, because not always do people perform breaths and give a complete seal. And if you have a barrier device, it enables you to provide a complete seal when doing that. Now, first aid emergencies is a whole different ballgame. First aid emergencies, they recommend you protect yourself with gloves if the person is coughing or has blood on them, to use glasses or even a mask. But that's just because blood is a kind of a conduit for all sorts of diseases and illnesses. So I'm not saying you need to completely cover yourself head to toe when dealing with a first aid emergency. In fact, I was teaching a group of preschool teachers, and they said there's no way when a child skins their knee that they're going to stop, run, get gloves, mask, all that kind of stuff. That's a bit excessive. But you do want to protect yourself. Like I said, blood. I mean, blood contact, it's a bloodborne pathogen that you're trying to keep yourself safe from. And if a child has a skinned knee, get the Band-Aid, give it to them, open it for them, and give it to them and let them put it on themselves, just in the interest of protecting both you and them. So I hope that touched upon the question a little bit.
I believe it did. And so our last one, because I also want to be conscious of time, we're just before the 2 o'clock hour here on the Pacific Coast. Your email, Casey, if you would just let people know that one more time.
Absolutely. My email, let me see if I can type it up here. Oops, nope, it's not going to let me do it. My email is my name, Casey, C-A-S-E-Y, at getcprdone.com. That's Casey, C-A-S-E-Y, at GETCPRDONE. And I just want to say thank you to those of you who attended. Thank you to the students who came and hopefully feel a bit more empowered to help in an emergency. And I'm closing with a picture of my brother. I just certified him last month. He had never taken CPR for the first time. So there he is giving breaths on a mannequin. So enjoy. Thank you to Joffe for helping host this webinar. I appreciate the opportunity to work with 2 of my esteemed colleagues. And thank you again for those of you who attended.